My name is Iris Sapphire, and I am 32 years old. 14 years ago, my parents withdrew my full-ride scholarship application to Yale University without telling me. They told the admissions office I was staying local to work a diner job and fund my older brother's car payments. For over a decade, I let them believe they won. I let them think they had trapped me in the life they mapped out for me. Then last month, my forensic accounting firm was hired to audit a multi-million-dollar corporate merger. The executives of the target company walked into the glass boardroom to meet the lead investigator who held their freedom in her hands. When my brother saw me sitting at the head of the table, he stopped breathing. Before we get into this, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Sophia Told Stories, but only if this story truly resonates with you. And drop your age, location, and local time in the comments. I want to know where you are right now. Now let me take you back 14 years to a grease-stained diner apron and the single phone call that fractured my family forever. It was a Tuesday evening in November. I was 18 years old, standing over a commercial sink at a 24-hour diner, scrubbing burned grease off an aluminum baking sheet. My hands smelled like industrial soap and stale coffee. I was working a double shift to save up for a bus ticket out of town. At the exact same time I was scraping that pan, the yellow landline phone mounted to the wall in my parents' kitchen started ringing. My mother, Diane, answered it. The man on the other end introduced himself as the Dean of Admissions for Yale University. He bypassed the standard mailed letters. He did not send an email. He called our house directly because 3 weeks prior, my application for a full academic scholarship had been abruptly withdrawn. He wanted to know why. He told my mother that they do not usually make these kinds of calls. He said my personal essay on systemic poverty was brilliant. He told her they really wanted her daughter on their campus. My mother did not gasp. She did not cry tears of joy. She did not ask him to hold the line so she could page me at work. She tucked the phone between her ear and her shoulder, smoothed out a pair of my brother's jeans, and told the Dean of Admissions a lie. She said I had reconsidered my options. She told him I decided to stay local to support my family and work in food service. Then she hung up the phone and put the jeans in a laundry basket. I only found out this conversation happened because of my older brother, Declan. Declan was the golden child. He was currently failing his second semester at the local community college and spending his tuition money on car modifications. He was sitting at the kitchen table eating a sandwich when the call came in. When I walked through the front door at midnight, my feet aching from a long shift, Declan was waiting in the living room. He tossed a damp dish towel at my chest. It hit my jacket and fell to the floor. "You missed a call from Connecticut," he said, a slow smirk spreading across his face. "Some guy from a college. Mom told him you are too busy flipping burgers to read books." I froze. The ambient noise of the television faded out. The exhaustion in my bones evaporated, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. I looked past Declan to the hallway where my mother's bedroom door was cracked open. The light was still on. I did not take off my coat. I walked straight down the hall and pushed her door open. I pushed the bedroom door open. My mother was propped up against a pile of floral pillows reading a lifestyle magazine. She did not flinch when the door hit the wall. She merely turned a glossy page, dampening her index finger to catch the paper. I stood in the doorframe wearing my grease-stained uniform, breathing in the scent of lavender lotion and quiet deceit. I asked her a very simple question. I asked her why the Dean of Admissions for a university I spent 4 years bleeding over a keyboard to reach called our house regarding a withdrawn application. She did not look up from her article about patio furniture. She let a few seconds pass, ensuring I understood exactly where I ranked on her list of priorities. "College is not for people like us," she said, her voice smooth and untroubled. "You need to stay home and work. Declan needs help with his car payments." I stared at her face. I looked for a trace of guilt, a flicker of shame, or even a defensive posture. There was nothing but casual indifference. The blatant admission hung in the warm bedroom air. My future, my intellect, my escape route from this town was merely collateral to fund my brother's mediocrity. I was not a daughter. I was a financial battery, meant to be drained so her favored child could keep driving a modified sedan he could not afford. I did not yell. Yelling implies you believe the other person will listen. Shouting is an act of hope. It assumes the person across from you possesses a conscience that can be awakened by your pain. I had no such hope left. The scoreboard had always been rigged. Every straight A I brought home was ignored, while every passing grade Declan managed was rewarded with a dinner out. I turned around and walked back down the hall to my small room. I pulled 2 canvas duffel bags from the top shelf of my closet. I did not pack memories. I did not pack the stuffed animals from childhood or the framed photographs that collected dust on my dresser. I packed survival. I rolled up sturdy denim jeans, plain cotton shirts, heavy socks, and my only winter coat. I packed my birth certificate, my social security card, and the small stash of cash I hid inside an old shoebox. The silence in the house was heavy. Declan was back in the living room laughing at a late-night television show, oblivious to the tectonic plates shifting beneath our family foundation. I zipped the bags shut. The metal teeth interlocking sounded like a final decision. I slung one strap over my left shoulder and grabbed the other handle with my right hand. I was ready to walk out into the dark. But the conflict escalated before I even reached the front door. My father, Richard, stood in the narrow hallway, blocking my exit. He wore his standard flannel shirt and a dark scowl. He was not a physically large man, but he carried the dense, stubborn weight of a patriarch who viewed his children as property. He crossed his arms over his chest, creating a human barricade between me and the entryway. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, his voice a low rumble designed to intimidate. "I am leaving," I replied, keeping my gaze locked directly on his eyes. "You are not going anywhere until we settle up," Richard said, extending an open palm toward me. "You owe us for 18 years of room and board. Hand over your diner paychecks, Iris. Every cent. You do not get to sleep under my roof, eat my food, and then walk out without paying your debts." He wanted to strip me of the final $300 I possessed. He wanted to break my legs financially so I would have no choice but to crawl back to my bedroom and wake up for the morning shift. He expected me to cry. He expected me to argue. Instead, I reached into my uniform pocket. My fingers brushed against the hard, jagged edge of my brass house key. I pulled it out, holding it between my thumb and index finger. I did not say a word. I reached past him and slid the key across the polished wood of the hall console table. The metal scraped against the varnish, leaving a faint scratch. "Keep the key," I said. "Consider the debt paid." I stepped around him, bracing my shoulder against the wall to squeeze past his rigid frame. He did not grab me. The sheer audacity of my silence paralyzed him long enough for me to reach the doorknob. I turned the latch, pulled the heavy oak door open, and stepped out into the November night. The weather was unforgiving. A freezing rain had started to fall, turning the suburban sidewalks into slick sheets of black ice. The wind bit through the thin fabric of my uniform pants. I had 3 miles to cover to reach the only place I knew would be open and warm. A different 24-hour diner located off the interstate highway. I walked. Water seeped through the seams of my worn sneakers, soaking my socks. My hands grew numb, clutching the heavy canvas straps of my duffel bags. Cars sped past me on the dark road, spraying freezing slush against my shins. I did not stop. Every time a shiver racked my spine, I pictured my mother turning the page of her magazine. That image became a furnace in my chest. I fed the fire with every step, burning away the last remaining traces of daughterly duty. It took me an hour and a half to reach the glowing neon sign of the highway diner. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for a few long-haul trucks idling in the back. I pushed through the glass double doors, shaking the freezing rain from my coat. The air inside smelled of stale grease and black coffee. A tired waitress behind the counter gave me a sympathetic nod, but asked no questions. I slid into a vinyl booth in the far back corner, dropping my bags onto the cracked seat. I ordered a cup of black coffee, just to rent the space. I wrapped my freezing palms around the ceramic mug, letting the heat bleed into my numb skin. I waited until the wall clock above the kitchen doors read 2 in the morning. I stood up and walked to the alcove near the restrooms, where a silver payphone hung on the wall. My fingers were still stiff and clumsy as I fed quarters into the slot. Earlier that evening, before I left the house, I had memorized the phone number scribbled on the kitchen notepad next to the landline. It was a direct emergency contact line the dean had left with my mother, hoping she would pass it along to me. I dialed the digits. The line rang twice before clicking over to a tired but professional voice. Dean of Admissions speaking. I gripped the heavy plastic receiver. "This is Iris Sapphire," I said, my voice trembling slightly from the lingering cold. "You called my house a few hours ago. My mother lied to you. I never withdrew my application. I want to attend your university. I will mop your floors. I will wash the cafeteria dishes. I just need my application reinstated." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, the kind of pause that makes the blood rush to your ears. I could hear him shifting papers on a desk hundreds of miles away. "Iris," he finally said, his tone softening with an understanding that broke my heart a little. "I suspected something was wrong. That is why I made the call. Your essay spoke of a girl fighting to survive her environment. The woman on the phone sounded like the environment itself." He told me he had frozen the withdrawal. My spot was still held. A wave of relief so profound it made my knees weak washed over me in that dingy diner alcove. But the relief was instantly shattered by his next sentence. "I can reinstate your academic acceptance," he explained, "but the financial aspect is tied to federal regulations. We offered you a full ride based on a combination of university endowments and federal grants. To disperse those grants, the government requires a verified signature on your financial dependency forms." I stared at the peeling paint on the diner wall. "I am 18, I said. "I am a legal adult." "You are 18, but under federal guidelines you are classified as a dependent student until you turn 24, he replied. "Unless you are legally emancipated by a court of law, we must have a parent sign the final authorization to release the funds. The deadline for the grant matching program closes in exactly 48 hours. If we do not have that signature by Thursday morning, the state pulls the matching funds and your scholarship becomes void. I cannot bypass federal law, Iris." He gave me 48 hours to secure a signature from a woman who wanted me to serve diner food until I died. I hung up the payphone receiver. The dial tone cut off, leaving me in the humming quiet of the diner corridor. I needed a parent's signature to unlock the federal grants that accompanied the scholarship. I pictured Richard demanding my paychecks in the hallway. I pictured Diane smoothing out my brother's jeans. I knew, with terrifying certainty, that my parents would rather watch me starve on the street than sign a piece of paper handing me my freedom. The sun rose over the interstate, painting the diner windows in bruised shades of purple and gray. I had 48 hours to secure a signature from parents who viewed my existence as a localized tax bracket. You cannot finalize a legal emancipation decree in 2 days. The judicial system does not operate on the frantic timeline of a desperate teenager. But I learned very quickly that you can file an emergency petition for an injunction. If a judge granted a temporary order of independence pending a full hearing, the University Financial Aid Office would accept it as a placeholder. The clock was ticking, and I had to build a watertight legal case against my own bloodline before Thursday morning. I left the diner and walked straight to my high school. I did not go to class. I bypassed the homeroom bells and marched directly into the cramped, disorganized office of my guidance counselor, Mrs. Higgins. She was a tired woman, near retirement, who always kept a jar of cheap peppermint candies on her desk. I sat across from her and laid out my reality. I explained the withdrawn Yale application, the phone call from the dean, the demand for my paychecks, and the freezing walk to the highway. I did not cry. Tears are a luxury for people who have a safety net to catch them when they fall. I had concrete floors and minimum wage. I needed a sworn affidavit detailing my parents' refusal to contribute a single cent to my higher education and their active attempts to sabotage my enrollment. Mrs. Higgins listened in stunned silence. She had spent years watching my brother Declan coast through the corridors while I stayed late in the computer lab formatting scholarship essays. She did not offer empty platitudes. She rolled her chair over to her bulky desktop computer, opened a blank document, and typed out a devastatingly precise legal statement verifying my financial estrangement. She signed it in thick black ink and stamped it with the official school seal. That piece of paper was my foundation. Next, I needed financial proof. I took a city bus to the local public library and paid 10 cents a page to print out my banking history. I organized 2 years of diner pay stubs, sorting them chronologically in a cheap plastic binder. I highlighted every grocery purchase, every utility bill contribution I had been forced to make, and every deposit I saved. I built a paper trail of my own survival. I was proving to a judge that I had already been raising myself. The emergency filing bought me the time I needed. The university accepted the court-stamped petition and locked in the federal grants pending the final hearing. For the next 3 weeks, I lived on a worn floral sofa in the living room of a diner waitress named Brenda. I worked double shifts. I saved every dollar. I prepared for the final court date that would legally sever me from Richard and Diane Sapphire. The morning of the final hearing, I stood in Brenda's tiny bathroom, staring at my reflection. I was wearing a borrowed navy blue blazer that was 2 sizes too big. The shoulder pads drooped, and the sleeves swallowed my wrists, requiring me to roll them up twice. It smelled faintly of mothballs and stale cigarette smoke. I smoothed down the lapels. I needed to look like an adult capable of navigating the world alone. I gathered my plastic binder of evidence and walked out to my car. The car was a dented, rusted Honda Civic I had purchased with my own tip money a year prior. Because I was a minor at the time of the sale, the dealership required an adult to sign the title. The vehicle was legally registered in my father's name, even though he had never contributed a dime toward the engine, the tires, or the gasoline. I turned the key. The engine sputtered and roared to life. I pulled out onto the main avenue heading toward the downtown courthouse. I was 10 minutes away from the municipal building when the flashing red and blue lights ignited in my rearview mirror. A sharp spike of adrenaline pierced my chest. I checked my speedometer. I was driving exactly the speed limit. Both of my headlights were functioning. I signaled and pulled over onto the gravel shoulder of the road, shifting the gear into park. I rolled down the manual window as a uniformed police officer approached the driver's side. His hand was resting cautiously on his utility belt. "License and registration," he instructed, his tone tight and professional. I handed him my plastic card and pulled the registration from the glove compartment. He glanced at the papers and then looked down at me. "Step out of the vehicle, please." My pulse pounded in my ears. "I'm going to be late for a court hearing," I explained, my voice shaking. "Was I speeding?" "Step out of the vehicle," the officer repeated, stepping back to give me room. I opened the door and stepped out onto the cold gravel. Before I could process the situation, he grabbed my left wrist, pulled it behind my back, and secured a heavy metal handcuff around it. He grabbed my right wrist and locked the second cuff in place. The cold steel bit into my skin. "What are you doing?" I asked, panic finally breaking through my composed exterior. "I have not done anything wrong. This vehicle was reported stolen early this morning by the registered owner," the officer stated, patting down the pockets of my oversized blazer. "Richard Sapphire filed the report." The air left my lungs. The humiliation washed over me like a physical blow. Cars drove past on the avenue, slowing down to watch a teenager in an oversized suit standing on the side of the road in handcuffs. This was Richard's parting gift. He knew exactly what time my emancipation hearing was scheduled. He orchestrated this traffic stop to ensure I missed my court appearance, knowing a failure to appear would result in a dismissed case. He weaponized the police department to drag me back under his control. I stood shivering in the morning air and made a split-second calculation. Fighting the officer would lead to an arrest. Arguing about the payment history of the Honda would require a civil court date I did not have time to attend. "The car belongs to him," I said, my voice dropping to a dead, flat calm. "The keys are in the ignition. I surrender the vehicle. Am I under arrest for grand theft, or are you going to let me walk away?" The officer paused. He radioed dispatch, verifying the bizarre nature of a stolen car report, where the suspect immediately surrendered the property without a fight. Because my father had only reported the car unauthorized for my use and had not pressed formal felony charges yet, the officer unlocked the cuffs. "Leave the keys," he commanded. I reached into the passenger seat, grabbed my plastic binder of evidence and my purse. I left the keys dangling in the ignition. I walked away from the only piece of valuable property I owned and hiked half a mile to the nearest public transit stop. I paid the bus fare with trembling fingers. I smelled like diesel fumes and cold sweat. I burst through the heavy wooden doors of courtroom 4B exactly 12 minutes late. The judge was preparing to call the next docket. I marched down the center aisle, my oversized blazer flapping around my waist, my wrists still bearing the faint red indentations of police steel. I slapped my plastic binder onto the defendant's table and looked up at the bench. I presented my case. I showed the judge the diner stubs, the school affidavit, and the police report my father had filed that very morning to sabotage my attendance. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, flipped through my meticulous records. She looked at my red wrists. She did not ask a single question about my parents' side of the story. She stamped the decree in heavy red ink. I was legally free. 2 days later, I arrived in New Haven. I stepped off the regional train with $412 to my name, a plastic storage bin containing my clothes, and a heart sealed shut behind a fortress of reinforced concrete. The campus was a breathtaking expanse of Gothic architecture, manicured lawns, and towering libraries that looked like cathedrals. My classmates unpacked cashmere sweaters from expensive leather trunks, laughing with parents who kissed their foreheads and handed them emergency credit cards. I unpacked my plastic bin in a cramped dorm room, assigning every single dollar I possessed to a strict survival budget. I settled into a grueling double life. By day, I sat in vaulted lecture halls, absorbing macroeconomic theory and complex calculus alongside the children of senators and hedge fund managers. By night, I wore a gray uniform and pushed a heavy mop bucket through the very same academic buildings, emptying trash cans and scrubbing linoleum floors to earn my meal money. I slept 4 hours a night. I did not socialize. I did not attend football games or fraternity parties. I worked. I studied. I survived. I thought the worst chapter of my life was permanently closed. I thought I had outrun Richard and Diane. I believed the geographic distance and the legal decree had rendered them powerless. But as I scrubbed those library floors dreaming of a pristine corporate future I did not know, my parents were busy in the dark. I had no idea they were already laying a financial trap using my name, my history, and my stolen identity. A trap meticulously designed to detonate a decade later and burn my new life to the ground. The Yale University campus breathed old money. Marble archways stretched toward the sky. Gothic spires cast long shadows over manicured lawns. My peers possessed a casual entitlement, carrying trust funds heavier than my canvas duffel bags. Winter arrived fast, and the quad became a sea of expensive goose-down parkas. I navigated the icy pathways enveloped in a stiff wool coat purchased from a thrift store donation bin. They spent their weekends taking the train down to Manhattan, dining at exclusive restaurants, or visiting family estates in the Hamptons. The university functioned on 2 distinct frequencies. The daylight hours belonged to debate seminars, rowing team practices, and casual intellectual discussions on the courtyards. The nocturnal hours belonged to me. I spent my weekends plunging dormitory toilets and buffing the mahogany floors of the university library. I scrubbed the grout in the science building bathrooms until my knuckles bled. I hauled heavy bags of refuse down narrow service stairwells while my peers slept soundly under plush duvets. The scent of industrial ammonia became my signature perfume. My hands remained cracked from caustic bleach and scalding water. I existed in their periphery, a silent phantom pushing a yellow mop bucket through the halls of ultimate privilege. The bone-deep exhaustion settled into my muscles, but I welcomed the physical ache. It kept my mind focused, preventing the bitter memories of my old suburban bedroom from creeping into my thoughts. I enrolled in an upper-level elective during the fall of my sophomore year. The course catalog listed it as Forensic Accounting and Fraud Examination. The instructor was Professor Evelyn Sterling. She did not wear the typical academic uniform of tweed jackets or pearl necklaces. She favored tailored black suits and possessed the chilling, calculated gaze of a seasoned predator. She had spent 12 years at the Securities and Exchange Commission dismantling insider trading rings. Rumor dictated she once bankrupted a corrupt pharmaceutical executive using nothing but his misplaced catering receipts before transitioning to academia. Her lectures were not about balancing ledgers or memorizing tax codes. They were about human deception. She taught us how greed alters the mathematical landscape. For our midterm examination, she handed the class a sprawling labyrinth of redacted financial statements from a collapsed real estate conglomerate. Our task was simple on paper, but nearly impossible in practice. We needed to find the missing capital. My wealthy classmates approached the numbers like naive mathematicians. They looked for arithmetic errors or simple clerical mistakes. I approached the numbers like a survivor who knew the darker side of human nature. I ignored the pristine surface data, the glossy executive summaries, and the flawless balance sheets. I hunted for the shadows. I tracked microscopic discrepancies. I noticed how the incorporation dates of certain entities perfectly aligned with the parent corporation's quarterly loss reports. I identified 3 nested shell companies registered in obscure offshore jurisdictions, matching their mailing addresses to vacant lots in the Cayman Islands. I cross-referenced vendor invoices against property deeds, searching for the invisible strings connecting the hollow organizations. I dismantled the corporate illusion in 4 relentless days. Professor Sterling asked me to stay after the lecture hall emptied on a Friday afternoon. She stood behind her wooden podium, holding my printed submission. She did not grade it with a traditional letter. She just stared at me, analyzing my posture. "You mapped the illicit fund transfers faster than some of my former federal colleagues," she noted, her tone devoid of typical academic coddling. "Most students assume these executives made honest mistakes. You assumed they were lying from the very first page. Why is that?" I looked at the chalkboard, then back to her sharp eyes. "Because honest people do not hide their footprints," I answered. She nodded slowly, absorbing the truth in my statement. "You see the numbers the way traumatized people see the world, Iris. You look for the lie." Under her intense, unwavering mentorship, I pivoted my entire academic trajectory. I stopped trying to mimic the generational wealth surrounding me and started learning how to dissect it, piece by piece. I memorized tax evasion typologies, money laundering methodologies, and corporate espionage tactics. I turned my hypervigilance into a lucrative weapon. The same hyper-awareness that kept me safe in a hostile household, watching Richard and Diane for signs of impending conflict, now made me a lethal auditor. I learned to read the silence in a financial report, the empty spaces where truth should reside. 4 grueling years vanished into a blur of library caffeine, night shift floor wax, and relentless ambition. I graduated summa cum laude, finishing at the very top of my class. The commencement ceremony took place under a brilliant May sky. Thousands of proud parents cheered from the folding chairs arranged across the sprawling green grass, snapping photographs and holding bouquets of flowers. I walked across the stage, grabbed my leather-bound diploma, and looked out at the designated section for my reserved guest tickets. 4 empty chairs sat in row G. My parents and my brother did not show up. They did not send a card. They did not call the diner or the dorm. I stared at those vacant seats and felt nothing. No grief, no longing, no anger. The void they left behind had calcified into a dense protective armor. I traded the ivy-covered brick for concrete, steel, and glass. I accepted a highly competitive offer at a premier forensic auditing firm in downtown Chicago, specializing in high-stakes corporate fraud. My 20s became a masterclass in relentless upward mobility. I hunted embezzlers, crooked executives, and corrupt board members for 60 hours a week. I once spent 6 months untangling a sophisticated web of fake invoices created by a logistics director saving a client $40 million and sending the culprit to federal prison. My mind became a vault of encrypted data and damning evidence. The firm rewarded my brutal efficiency with rapid promotions and substantial bonuses. I was no longer the frightened teenager walking through the freezing rain. I purchased a penthouse condominium overlooking the vast expanse of Lake Michigan, paying the hefty down payment in cold, hard cash. I tailored my wardrobe, filling my spacious closet with silk blouses, sharp blazers, and designer heels. More importantly, I cultivated a tight-knit, chosen family of trusted colleagues and loyal friends who knew absolutely nothing about the rusted Honda Civic, the diner uniforms, or the abusive suburban household I left behind. We hosted dinner parties, drank expensive wine, and discussed global markets. I built an impenetrable fortress. My personal bank accounts were heavily insulated. My credit score was pristine and monitored daily. My residential address remained unlisted to ensure maximum privacy. I designed an adult life where no individual could ever leverage my survival against me again. I held the reins. I controlled the narrative. I was safe. I was financially independent. I was untouchable. Or so I genuinely believed. It was a mundane Tuesday morning in late October. 10 full years had passed since I slid my brass house key across that wooden console table and walked away from my bloodline. I was sitting at my sleek mahogany desk reviewing a preliminary risk assessment report when the secure private line on my desk phone began to ring. The sound cut through the quiet professional hum of my corner office. Only senior partners and direct corporate clients possessed the clearance to dial that specific extension. I picked up the heavy black receiver, expecting to hear the voice of a managing director discussing a quarterly audit. Instead, a sound spilled out from the earpiece that froze the blood in my veins. A cloying, rehearsed, pitch-perfect tone I had spent 3,650 days trying to forget. "Iris, honey, it is Mom. Iris, honey, it is Mom." The voice dripped with a rehearsed sweetness that made my stomach drop into a bottomless chasm. For a fraction of a second, my brain refused to process the audio. 10 years of total silence. 3,650 days without a birthday card, a holiday greeting, or a simple text message. Now she was broadcasting through the encrypted receiver of my secure corporate line. My immediate physical reaction bypassed any logical thought. My right hand tightened around the gold-plated barrel of my expensive fountain pen. I squeezed the writing instrument so hard the metal dug into my palm, and my knuckles turned a stark, ghostly white. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my face remained an impassive mask. I controlled my breathing, drawing a slow, measured intake of air through my nose. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not inquire if I was happy, healthy, or married. My mother skipped over a decade of my existence as if we had spoken yesterday afternoon. Her tone carried the breezy, casual entitlement of a woman who believed she still held authority over my life. "I am calling because we have a quick hypothetical question," Diane continued, her voice adopting a falsely innocent cadence. "Your father and I were discussing some business strategies over breakfast. We know you work in the accounting industry now. We were wondering if you could explain some of the common tax loopholes for small suburban enterprises. Just a few tips on how owners structure asset transfers to avoid heavy penalties." The sheer audacity paralyzed me for a heartbeat. My mother, Diane Sapphire, a woman who once told the dean of Yale University that I was staying home to flip burgers, was now soliciting free financial advice from the daughter she discarded. She wanted to mine the expertise I built from the ground up without offering a single ounce of maternal affection in exchange. I did not raise my voice. I did not demand an apology for the traffic stop, the stolen car report, or the rigged family scoreboard. I relied on the cold, calculating professionalism that earned my corner office. My consulting fee is $800 an hour, I stated, my voice flat and devoid of any familial warmth. I do not provide complimentary legal or financial counsel to anyone. I suggest you hire a local, certified public accountant to navigate your hypothetical tax liabilities. Iris, do not take that tone with me, she snapped, the sugary facade cracking instantly to reveal the familiar bitter resentment underneath. We are your parents. Family helps family. You lost the right to invoke that word 10 years ago, I replied. Do not call this number again. I placed the heavy receiver back onto the cradle, severing the connection. I exhaled a long, shaky breath. My pulse slowly returned to a normal rhythm. I uncurled my stiff fingers from the fountain pen, placing it carefully on the leather desk blotter. I thought the brief interaction was just another boundary tested and successfully held. I believed Diane was simply reaching out to exploit my profession for a minor tax deduction on whatever small venture Richard was running out of their garage. I dismissed the strange inquiry as a pathetic attempt to extract value from the child they drove away. I turned my attention back to the glowing monitors on my desk. I poured a fresh cup of dark roast coffee and mentally categorized the bizarre phone call as a closed file. But the true conflict was quietly brewing within the encrypted servers of my firm. An hour after my mother tried to breach my defenses, our internal management software delivered a high-priority notification. A new monumental corporate merger required immediate forensic auditing. A sprawling private equity group was preparing to acquire a rapidly growing tech logistics enterprise named Apex Solutions. Before the ink could dry on the 9-figure acquisition contract, our firm was hired to conduct an exhaustive due diligence review. The buyers needed us to comb through every ledger, every vendor invoice, and every payroll record to ensure the target company was structurally sound and financially transparent. Apex Solutions operated out of Denver, boasting a robust portfolio of supply chain optimization software. They were a lucrative, emerging player in the logistics sector. As the lead investigator assigned to the portfolio, my first customary task was to map the organizational hierarchy. I needed to understand who held the keys to the financial kingdom before I started tearing their castle apart. Out of pure habit, I opened a secure browser tab and pulled up the professional networking site LinkedIn. I typed Apex Solutions into the search bar and navigated to their corporate page. I clicked on the tab displaying their executive leadership team. I scanned the polished corporate headshots of the chief executive officer, the chief financial officer, and the legal counsel. Then my eyes moved to the second row. My breath caught in my throat. The air vanished from my corner office. I leaned closer to the high-resolution screen, blinking hard to ensure my vision was not betraying me. Sitting right there, occupying the fourth digital square on the executive roster, was a face I had not seen since I walked out of a suburban hallway in the freezing rain. The name printed beneath the photograph was Declan Sapphire. His official corporate title was listed as the Vice President of Operations. I stared at the screen while the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. The photograph showed my older brother wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit and a luxury watch. His hair was professionally styled, and his smile radiated the arrogant confidence of a seasoned corporate titan. My mind fiercely rejected the information flashing before my eyes. Declan was the golden child who spent his youth failing basic high school courses. He was the teenager who flunked out of community college twice because he preferred to spend his tuition money modifying a cheap sedan. He possessed no higher education degree, no logistical training, and zero corporate management experience. The boy who used to mock me for studying late into the night was now somehow sitting at the pinnacle of a highly profitable tech enterprise. I clicked on his professional profile. His work history was a vague tapestry of fabricated consulting roles and exaggerated responsibilities. There was no logical trajectory to explain how a chronic underachiever ascended to the vice presidency of a $50 million company. Corporate America does not hand executive keys to uneducated dropouts without a profound underlying reason. The pieces of the puzzle began to slam together in my mind with terrifying speed. My mother, calling on a secure line after a decade of silence, asking highly specific questions about tax loopholes and asset transfers. My brother, sitting as an executive in a prime acquisition target with a valuation hovering around $50 million. The illusion of a random family phone call evaporated. Diane did not contact me by accident. She was fishing for information. The Sapphires were orchestrating something deep within the financial shadows of Apex Solutions, and they were attempting to gauge my professional awareness. They knew I worked in forensic accounting. They likely panicked when the private equity buyers announced they were hiring a Chicago-based firm to audit the merger. Declan was sitting on a throne built of glass, and my firm had just been handed the official legal mandate to shatter his kingdom. I was no longer a helpless 18-year-old girl begging a university dean for a lifeline. I was the lead forensic auditor, holding the magnifying glass over his fake corporate empire. Our paths were no longer parallel lines stretching across different states. They were destined to crash into a devastating intersection. I printed the executive roster. I picked up my pen. The audit was scheduled to begin the following morning. Let me ask you a question. If you suddenly held the power to investigate the family that destroyed your youth, would you recuse yourself to keep the peace, or would you dig your hands into the dirt? Drop a 1 in the comments to walk away or a 2 to dig in. I want to know what you would do. I did not recuse myself. I did not march into the managing partner's office and declare a conflict of interest. Ethics guidelines dictate that an auditor should step aside when familial ties are present. But my bloodline severed those ties a decade ago when they locked me out in the freezing rain. Legally and emotionally, I was a stranger auditing a stranger. As the lead forensic investigator assigned to the Apex Solutions acquisition, I possessed unrestricted access to their deepest financial vaults. Every ledger, every hidden offshore account, every encrypted digital receipt belonged to me. I initiated the review early Wednesday morning, expecting to uncover typical executive bloat. I anticipated finding inflated expense reports, luxurious corporate retreats misclassified as business meetings, or perhaps evidence of my brother's standard intellectual incompetence. Declan always searched for the lazy shortcut. I assumed he had simply talked his way into a vice presidency and was currently drowning in operational duties he failed to comprehend. I was prepared to document gross mismanagement. What I unearthed instead was a chilling masterpiece of corporate deception. Declan was not mismanaging operations. He was bypassing them entirely to run an elaborate shadow network right under the noses of the board of directors. The logistics sector operates on razor-thin margins, heavily reliant on third-party contractors and external supply chain consultants. It provides the perfect camouflage for fabricated expenses. I deployed our proprietary analytic software to scan the accounts payable database, searching for anomalies in vendor billing cycles. The algorithm flagged a cluster of irregularities within seconds. Over the past 24 months, Apex Solutions had hemorrhaged millions of dollars, disguised as specialized operational consulting fees. The invoices were pristine. They featured professional letterheads, complex itemized service descriptions, and sequential billing numbers. A junior accountant would have stamped them approved without a second glance. But I was trained by a federal predator to look for the lie. The lie resided in the velocity of the capital. The clock on my computer screen read 2 in the morning. The sprawling city of Chicago slept far below my high-rise office window. The room was dark, except for the sharp blue glow of my dual monitors reflecting off my retinas. My colleagues had gone home hours ago, leaving me alone in the silent building with a cooling cup of black coffee and a mounting sense of dread. I pulled the digital thread tracing the fraudulent capital as it exited the Apex corporate accounts. The money fragmented, flowing into 3 separate limited liability companies. On paper, these entities provided vital tech infrastructure counseling. In reality, they possessed no physical storefronts, no employee payroll records, and 0 digital footprints. They were ghost corporations, existing solely to absorb stolen wealth. To uncover the architects behind a ghost corporation, an auditor must penetrate the state registry archives. Fraudsters often hire anonymous registered agents or obscure law firms to shield their identities from public scrutiny. I routed my search through the Colorado Secretary of State database, pulling the original articles of incorporation for the 3 suspicious entities. The documents rendered slowly on my right monitor. I scrolled down to the signature line, anticipating a fake name or a proxy firm. My gaze locked onto the digitized ink. The registered agent, the primary financial beneficiary overseeing all 3 shell companies, was Richard Sapphire, my father. The breath rushed out of my lungs. I pushed my leather chair back away from the desk as if the monitors were emitting radiation. My mind raced, piecing together the architecture of the crime. Declan was utilizing his executive authority at Apex to authorize and expedite fraudulent vendor payments. He was embezzling corporate funds on a breathtaking scale. But a thief cannot simply deposit stolen millions into a personal checking account without triggering federal alarms. The money required washing. That is where Richard and Diane entered the equation. My parents were laundering the stolen capital through the fictitious consulting firms cleaning the dirty cash before filtering it back into the family ecosystem. The tax loophole questions my mother asked on the phone were not hypothetical. She was crowdsourcing money laundering strategies from the daughter she abandoned. Richard Sapphire, a man who once bullied a teenager for diner tips, was now acting as a phantom corporate director. He likely opened the commercial bank accounts using his pristine suburban credit history, masking the illicit flow of funds beneath a veneer of middle-class respectability. Diane was undoubtedly managing the daily ledgers, ensuring the deposits were scattered across various investments to avoid raising red flags with the Internal Revenue Service. They operated like a cartel, disguised as a typical American family. The hypocrisy tasted like ash in my mouth. They convinced themselves they were superior citizens while committing felonies that carried 20-year prison sentences. This was not a petty theft. It was an organized syndicate operating out of the same suburban household where I was once told I owed 18 years of room and board. They had stolen an estimated $12 million in just under 2 years. The sheer scale of the theft demonstrated a sociopathic level of greed. Declan traded his rusted community college sedan for a fleet of luxury vehicles and a vice presidency, while my parents played the role of sophisticated criminal financiers. They constructed a wealthy dynasty on a foundation of pure deceit. And fate had just handed me the sledgehammer to bring the entire structure crashing down. A profound, chilling calm washed over me. The anxiety that gripped my chest melted away, replaced by the icy precision of a professional executioner. I printed the articles of incorporation, the forged invoices, and the corresponding bank transfer receipts. The printer whirred in the silent office, spitting out page after page of undeniable legal doom. I stacked the warm papers neatly, slipping them into a secure leather folder. I could have attached the findings to an email, drafted a preliminary summary, and sent it directly to the acquiring private equity group. That action would have initiated an immediate federal inquiry, terminating the merger and triggering arrests within days. But corporate audits require physical due diligence. An investigator must verify the digital anomalies with on-site inspections and face-to-face executive interviews. To finalize the report, I needed to look the thief in the eye. I booked a first-class ticket on the earliest morning flight out of the city. I packed a tailored suit, a digital audio recorder, and my leather folder. I was flying to Denver to step inside the Apex Solutions headquarters. Declan thought he was untouchable, ruling his stolen empire surrounded by sycophants and luxury. He had no idea his estranged sister was currently descending from the sky, holding the exact coordinates of his impending ruin. The collision was no longer a distant possibility. It was landing on his doorstep, and I was prepared to watch him panic when he realized the girl he mocked 14 years ago was now the architect of his destruction. I did not recuse myself. I did not march into the managing partner's office and declare a conflict of interest. Ethics guidelines dictate that an auditor should step aside when familial ties are present, but my bloodline severed those ties a decade ago when they locked me out in the freezing rain. Legally and emotionally, I was a stranger auditing a stranger. As the lead forensic investigator assigned to the Apex Solutions acquisition, I possessed unrestricted access to their deepest financial vaults. Every ledger, every hidden offshore account, every encrypted digital receipt belonged to me. I initiated the review early Wednesday morning, expecting to uncover typical executive bloat. I anticipated finding inflated expense reports, luxurious corporate retreats misclassified as business meetings, or perhaps evidence of my brother's standard intellectual incompetence. Declan always searched for the lazy shortcut. I assumed he had simply talked his way into a vice presidency and was currently drowning in operational duties he failed to comprehend. I was prepared to document gross mismanagement. What I unearthed instead was a chilling masterpiece of corporate deception. Declan was not mismanaging operations. He was bypassing them entirely to run an elaborate shadow network right under the noses of the board of directors. The logistics sector operates on razor-thin margins, heavily reliant on third-party contractors and external supply chain consultants. It provides the perfect camouflage for fabricated expenses. I deployed our proprietary analytic software to scan the accounts payable database, searching for anomalies in vendor billing cycles. The algorithm flagged a cluster of irregularities within seconds. Over the past 24 months, Apex Solutions had hemorrhaged millions of dollars, disguised as specialized operational consulting fees. The invoices were pristine. They featured professional letterheads, complex itemized service descriptions, and sequential billing numbers. A junior accountant would have stamped them approved without a second glance. But I was trained by a federal predator to look for the lie. The lie resided in the velocity of the capital. The clock on my computer screen read 2 a.m. The sprawling city of Chicago slept far below my high-rise office window. The room was dark, except for the sharp blue glow of my dual monitors reflecting off my retinas. My colleagues had gone home hours ago, leaving me alone in the silent building with a cooling cup of black coffee and a mounting sense of dread. I pulled the digital thread, tracing the fraudulent capital as it exited the Apex corporate accounts. The money fragmented, flowing into 3 separate limited liability companies. On paper, these entities provided vital tech infrastructure counseling. In reality, they possessed no physical storefronts, no employee payroll records, and 0 digital footprints. They were ghost corporations, existing solely to absorb stolen wealth. To uncover the architects behind a ghost corporation, an auditor must penetrate the state registry archives. Fraudsters often hire anonymous registered agents or obscure law firms to shield their identities from public scrutiny. I routed my search through the Colorado Secretary of State database, pulling the original articles of incorporation for the 3 suspicious entities. The documents rendered slowly on my right monitor. I scrolled down to the signature line, anticipating a fake name or a proxy firm. My gaze locked onto the digitized ink. The registered agent, the primary financial beneficiary overseeing all 3 shell companies, was Richard Sapphire, my father. The breath rushed out of my lungs. I pushed my leather chair back away from the desk as if the monitors were emitting radiation. My mind raced, piecing together the architecture of the crime. Declan was utilizing his executive authority at Apex to authorize and expedite fraudulent vendor payments. He was embezzling corporate funds on a breathtaking scale. But a thief cannot simply deposit stolen millions into a personal checking account without triggering federal alarms. The money required washing. That is where Richard and Diane entered the equation. My parents were laundering the stolen capital through the fictitious consulting firms cleaning the dirty cash before filtering it back into the family ecosystem. The tax loophole questions my mother asked on the phone were not hypothetical. She was crowdsourcing money laundering strategies from the daughter she abandoned. Richard Sapphire, a man who once bullied a teenager for diner tips, was now acting as a phantom corporate director. He likely opened the commercial bank accounts using his pristine suburban credit history, masking the illicit flow of funds beneath a veneer of middle-class respectability. Diane was undoubtedly managing the daily ledgers, ensuring the deposits were scattered across various investments to avoid raising red flags with the Internal Revenue Service. They operated like a cartel disguised as a typical American family. The hypocrisy tasted like ash in my mouth. They convinced themselves they were superior citizens while committing felonies that carried 20-year prison sentences. This was not a petty theft. It was an organized syndicate operating out of the same suburban household where I was once told I owed 18 years of room and board. They had stolen an estimated $12 million in just under 2 years. The sheer scale of the theft demonstrated a sociopathic level of greed. Declan traded his rusted community college sedan for a fleet of luxury vehicles and a vice presidency, while my parents played the role of sophisticated criminal financiers. They constructed a wealthy dynasty on a foundation of pure deceit. And fate had just handed me the sledgehammer to bring the entire structure crashing down. A profound, chilling calm washed over me. The anxiety that gripped my chest melted away, replaced by the icy precision of a professional executioner. I printed the articles of incorporation, the forged invoices, and the corresponding bank transfer receipts. The printer whirred in the silent office, spitting out page after page of undeniable legal doom. I stacked the warm papers neatly, slipping them into a secure leather folder. I could have attached the findings to an email, drafted a preliminary summary, and sent it directly to the acquiring private equity group. That action would have initiated an immediate federal inquiry, terminating the merger and triggering arrests within days. But corporate audits require physical due diligence. An investigator must verify the digital anomalies with on-site inspections and face-to-face executive interviews. To finalize the report, I needed to look the thief in the eye. I booked a first-class ticket on the earliest morning flight out of the city. I packed a tailored suit, a digital audio recorder, and my leather folder. I was flying to Denver to step inside the Apex Solutions headquarters. Declan thought he was untouchable, ruling his stolen empire surrounded by sycophants and luxury. He had no idea his estranged sister was currently descending from the sky, holding the exact coordinates of his impending ruin. The collision was no longer a distant possibility. It was landing on his doorstep, and I was prepared to watch him panic when he realized the girl he mocked 14 years ago was now the architect of his destruction. I left the glass-walled hallway in Denver and took a cab straight to the airport. I gave Declan a strict 48-hour window to resign and report his own financial crimes to the Apex Solutions Board of Directors. A small, naive fraction of my mind wondered if he might finally take accountability. I wondered if the sheer terror of federal prison might override his lifelong habit of taking the easy way out. He did not resign. He chose the established family playbook. He chose to deny, deflect, and destroy the accuser. The moment my cab pulled away from the corporate campus, Declan picked up his phone and called our parents. The next morning, the retaliatory strike began. During my childhood, my parents ruined my reputation over neighborhood fences and church pews. They painted me as the difficult, ungrateful daughter to local cashiers, extended relatives, and school teachers. They relied on small-town whispers to control the narrative. But this time, the stakes were not a teenage dispute over a diner paycheck. The stakes were a $50 million acquisition and a $12 million embezzlement ring. They could not rely on suburban gossip to save their stolen empire. They needed to orchestrate a professional assassination. They bypassed me entirely. They understood that attempting to intimidate me directly would fail. Instead, they aimed for the summit of my career. It was Thursday morning, just before 9 o'clock. My desk phone did not ring. Instead, a senior administrative assistant appeared at the threshold of my open office door. She looked uncharacteristically pale, holding a slim manila folder tightly against her chest. She informed me that Marcus Thorne requested my presence in his executive suite immediately. Marcus Thorne was the senior managing partner of the firm. He was a man who viewed human emotion as a severe corporate liability. He wore bespoke Italian suits cut with surgical precision and possessed a gaze like chipped flint. He cared about three things: billable hours, firm reputation, and mitigating legal risk. He did not build his career by harboring unpredictable employees. He eliminated liabilities before they could infect his balance sheets. I walked down the long, carpeted corridor toward the corner suite. The sprawling view of the Chicago skyline stretched out behind his expansive desk, but the room felt suffocating. Marcus did not offer me a seat. He remained standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, holding a printed transcript of a conference call. He turned around and placed the paper on his polished mahogany desk. He informed me that he had just spent 40 minutes on a direct call with the executive board of Apex Solutions and two individuals identifying themselves as Richard and Diane Sapphire. My mother had put on the performance of a lifetime. According to Marcus, Diane wept openly over the secure line. She played the role of the devastated, heartbroken matriarch facing a family tragedy. She spun a mesmerizing narrative designed to instantly discredit my audit. She told the partners that I was an estranged, deeply unstable woman who harbored a psychotic childhood grudge against my older brother. She weaponized my 10 years of silence, using the very boundary I created to survive them as proof of my supposed mental illness. Diane claimed that I was intentionally fabricating financial discrepancies to ruin Declan's legitimate tech success out of pure, unadulterated spite. She warned the firm that allowing me to continue the due diligence review would result in a catastrophic defamation lawsuit against the accounting agency. She framed my meticulous forensic investigation as the dangerous weapon of a bitter, jealous sister trying to tear apart a loving family. Marcus laced his fingers together, resting his hands on the desk. He scrutinized my posture, searching for a crack in my professional demeanor. He was weighing the potential fallout of a ruined merger against the credibility of his lead investigator. "Is this a personal vendetta, Sapphire?" he asked. His voice was a low, dangerous murmur. The heavy silence in his office descended like a physical weight. The only sound was the rhythmic, mechanical ticking of the antique brass clock sitting on his bookshelf. Every tick echoed in the sterile room. I stood perfectly still, processing the razor-thin edge I was balancing on. If I backed down right then, I could save myself. I could claim I made a preliminary miscalculation due to stress. I could hand the portfolio over to a different partner and recuse myself from the Apex file. I would keep my six-figure salary. I would keep my luxury condominium overlooking the lake. I would remain safe, but I would become complicit in a staggering federal crime. I would let them win. If I pushed forward, I staked everything I possessed on the line. I risked my certified public accountant license, my flawless professional reputation, and my entire life work. If my parents managed to bury their digital tracks, if there was a single fatal flaw in my documentation, my career would end in disgrace. I would be permanently blacklisted from the financial sector. In the past, when I stood in my childhood kitchen trying to defend my reality, my mother shut me down with a single dismissive sentence. But we were no longer in her house. We were in an arena built on raw data where tears held zero currency. I did not defend my mental health. I did not complain about my childhood or attempt to explain the emotional abuse that drove me away at 18. Excuses are the language of the guilty. I looked Marcus Thorne straight in the eye, holding his cold gaze without blinking. "It is not a vendetta," I stated, my voice radiating a chilling calm. "It is a felony." I unclasped my leather briefcase. I pulled out the heavy, 400-page unredacted dossier I had compiled over the last 72 hours. I stepped forward and dropped the thick binder onto the center of his mahogany desk. The dull thud echoed against the glass walls. I opened the cover and started walking him through the irrefutable architecture of the theft. I pointed to the flagged vendor invoices generated by Apex Solutions. I turned the page to reveal the matching deposit receipts routing the capital into the 3 ghost corporations. I showed him the state registry documents bearing Richard Sapphire's verified signature as the primary agent. I revealed the geolocational metadata, placing Declan at specific bank branches precisely when the illicit cash withdrawals occurred. I laid out the tangled web of money laundering, tax evasion, and corporate fraud with surgical detachment. I watched Marcus Thorne's expression shift. The skeptical edge in his eyes dissolved, replaced by the sharp, predatory focus of a veteran auditor recognizing a monumental crime. He stopped viewing me as an unstable liability and started viewing the evidence as a legal, ticking time bomb. The math did not care about Diane's tears. The bank routing numbers did not care about family grudges. Marcus closed the binder. He picked up his desk phone and pressed the speed dial button for the internal legal department. Within 20 minutes, the multi-million-dollar corporate merger was officially paused. The private equity buyers were quietly notified of a pending, catastrophic financial discrepancy. Declan's cash flow was instantly frozen, pending an external review. I walked out of the corner suite feeling a profound sense of vindication. The smear campaign failed. The corporate firewall held strong against their manipulation. But cornered animals do not simply surrender when their escape routes are blocked. My parents realized the phone call did not secure their stolen empire. They realized I was not going to vanish into the background. The battle was no longer contained to emails and conference calls. They were packing their bags and bringing the war directly to my front door. The suspension of the multi-million-dollar acquisition brought a temporary and deceptive quiet to my high-rise office. I spent 48 hours organizing the digital evidence, building a fortress of impenetrable data around my professional reputation. I believed the firewall I constructed was thick enough to keep the chaos contained to boardrooms and encrypted servers. I forgot that desperate people do not respect corporate boundaries. When their phone calls failed to secure my silence, they resorted to a tactic they had spent decades perfecting. They dragged their private warfare into the public light. It was a Thursday afternoon. The sky over Chicago was a pale, bruised gray, threatening a late autumn storm. I gathered my notes from a successful client strategy session on the 42nd floor and pressed the call button for the executive elevator. The descent was smooth and silent. My mind was already transitioning to my evening schedule. The polished steel doors glided open with a soft, melodic chime, revealing the sprawling expanse of our firm lobby. The lobby was designed to intimidate and impress. It featured imported Italian marble floors, vaulted ceilings, and towering panels of frosted glass. A pair of stern security guards manned a semicircular reception desk, ensuring that only authorized personnel and vetted clients ever breathed the conditioned air inside. It was a sanctuary of wealth and order. I stepped off the elevator, adjusting the strap of my leather briefcase. My heels clicked rhythmically against the stone. Then the rhythm faltered. Standing in the center of the atrium, bathed in the cold, ambient light of the lobby chandeliers, were 3 figures who fundamentally did not belong in my world: Richard Diane and Declan Sapphire. They had bypassed the standard visitor protocols, likely by claiming a fabricated family emergency to the front desk staff. My brother stood slightly behind our parents, wearing the same arrogant custom suit he wore in Denver, but his posture betrayed a simmering anxiety. He kept shifting his weight, checking his phone, and glancing toward the exit. Richard stood rigid, his jaw locked. his eyes scanning the passing executives with a mixture of awe and profound resentment. But it was Diane who orchestrated the ambush. The moment she spotted me stepping out of the elevator bank, her entire demeanor transformed. She did not approach me with the caution of a mother seeking a genuine reconciliation. She initiated a theatrical performance designed for maximum collateral damage. "Iris," she gasped. Her voice was not a whisper. It was a shrill, carrying wail engineered to bounce off the marble walls and command the attention of every single person within a 100-foot radius. Junior analysts paused mid-step. 2 senior partners lingering near the revolving doors turned their heads. The security guards stiffened at their stations. Diane rushed across the lobby. She stretched her arms out wide, her face contorted into a mask of pure, manufactured agony. Tears streamed down her cheeks, ruining her carefully applied makeup. She closed the distance between us, preparing to throw herself around my shoulders in a forceful, suffocating embrace. "Edith, please come home." Her voice cracked, echoing through the quiet corporate sanctuary. "We can fix this family. We just want our daughter back." It was a brilliant, calculated trap. In the brutal social ecosystem of corporate America, perception dictates reality. If I yelled at her to leave, I would instantly validate the narrative she sold to my managing partner. I would become the unstable, hostile daughter, screaming at her weeping, heartbroken mother in a professional setting. If I allowed the embrace, if I let her wrap her arms around me and accepted her public display of grief, I would signal compliance. I would show my colleagues that the ironclad forensic auditor was easily manipulated by familial guilt. She wanted to trap me in a physical manifestation of her lies. She relied on the basic human instinct to avoid public embarrassment, expecting me to shrink under the scrutiny of my peers. During my childhood, Diane only cried when she required a shield. When she discovered my secret Yale application, she did not shed a single tear. When I walked out into the freezing rain at 18, her eyes were bone dry. Her sorrow was a weapon she unsheathed only when an audience was present to validate her victimhood. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I did not drop my briefcase or cross my arms defensively. As her hands reached out to grab the lapels of my tailored blazer, I executed a single, deliberate movement. I took one step back. It was a clean, measured retreat, putting exactly 2 feet of empty space between my body and her grasping hands. Diane stumbled slightly, her momentum carrying her forward into the sterile air. Her arms dropped to her sides. The theatrical sobbing hitched in her throat, replaced by a flash of genuine, shocked indignation. She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face freezing into a hard, tight grimace. The lobby was dead silent. The ambient hum of the city traffic outside seemed to fade away. Every eye in the atrium was fixed on our standoff. "You do not want a daughter, Mom," I said. My voice was not loud, but it possessed a cold, penetrating clarity that sliced through the lingering echoes of her performance. I spoke from the diaphragm, ensuring the syllables reached the security desk and the lingering partners near the glass doors. "You want an accomplice." The sentence hung in the conditioned air, stripping away the facade of the grieving matriarch. It laid the reality of her presence bare for everyone to witness. She did not drive across state lines to mend a broken bond. She drove here to intimidate a federal witness. The truth of my statement shattered the carefully constructed illusion. Diane stepped back, her mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. Her script evaporated because it required my participation to function. That is when the patriarch lost control. Richard despised being defied. He demanded absolute obedience and derived his self-worth from dominating the people under his roof. Watching his wife fail to manipulate me, watching his estranged daughter stand unbothered in a fortress of wealth he could never achieve, ignited a volatile rage inside his chest. He shoved past Declan and marched toward me. The mask of the concerned protective father disintegrated. His face turned a dark mottled red, the veins standing out sharply against his neck. He raised his right arm, pointing a thick, calloused finger directly at my face. "You are dead to us," he snarled, his voice a low, gravelly threat that carried none of Diane's theatrical sorrow. "You are going to lose everything." He did not say, "We love you." He did not ask for mercy. He promised destruction. Before he could take another step forward, the firm head of security intervened. The guard, a broad-shouldered former police detective, materialized between us. He placed a firm, unyielding hand squarely on Richard's chest, halting his forward momentum. "It is time for you to leave, sir," the guard stated, his tone brokering no argument. Richard glared at the guard, then shifted his venomous gaze back to me. He lowered his hand, but the hostility radiating from his posture remained lethal. Declan grabbed our father's shoulder, pulling him back toward the exit, recognizing that an arrest in a corporate lobby would expedite their federal indictments. Diane followed them, wiping her face with a tissue, her performance abandoned. I stood in the center of the marble floor and watched the security team escort the Sapphire family through the revolving glass doors. I did not shake. I did not cry. I nodded politely to the senior partners who had witnessed the exchange and walked steadily toward the reception desk to sign a routine authorization form. But as I picked up the pen, a cold, heavy realization settled in the pit of my stomach. Richard Sapphire was many things, but he was rarely impulsive. He spent decades plotting to control my finances, steal my future, and launder millions of dollars through ghost corporations. He did not drive hundreds of miles to a heavily guarded skyscraper merely to yell a hollow insult in a public lobby. The lobby ambush was a distraction. It was a desperate, noisy smokescreen designed to rattle my nerves and draw my attention away from their true maneuver. As the heavy glass doors closed behind them, separating us once again, I knew my father's parting threat was not born of empty rage. They had a backup plan. They were already moving the chess pieces in the dark, preparing a strike so devastating it would threaten to lock me in a cage of their own making. 72 hours after the lobby ambush, the corporate guillotine fell. There was no dramatic firing sequence and no shouting match in the executive suites. The modern financial sector terminates access with sterile, silent efficiency. It was a Monday morning. I arrived at the glass skyscraper holding my usual black coffee, ready to finalize the preliminary fraud report. I stepped up to the security turnstiles and tapped my encoded identification badge against the optical reader. Instead of the familiar green chime, the scanner emitted a flat, harsh red tone. The glass barriers remained locked in place. I tried the badge a second time, assuming a simple magnetic error had occurred. The light flashed red again. Before I could signal the front desk, the head of security materialized at my side. It was the same broad-shouldered former detective who had escorted my parents out of the building just 3 days prior. He did not smile. He politely asked me to surrender my identification badge and my company-issued mobile device. He informed me that my network access had been permanently revoked effective at midnight. I was suspended with full pay pending a comprehensive internal and external inquiry. He handed me a sealed envelope bearing the managing partner's insignia and escorted me back through the revolving glass doors onto the cold Chicago pavement. I stood on the sidewalk surrounded by rushing commuters and opened the envelope. The letter inside was concise, stripped of all professional warmth. It stated that the acquiring private equity group had bypassed our internal audit and directly contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A formal federal probe regarding the Apex Solutions embezzlement was now underway. The final paragraph contained a sentence that made the morning air turn to ice in my lungs. It informed me that I was no longer serving as the lead investigator because federal agents had officially listed me as a primary person of interest in the criminal syndicate. I did not return to my condominium. I hailed a cab and directed the driver to a prestigious legal defense firm located in the financial district. I retained the services of Harrison Croft, a razor-sharp defense attorney who specialized in white-collar crime and federal indictments. We sat in his soundproof conference room while he leveraged his extensive network to pull the preliminary filings from the federal docket. When Harrison slid the printed briefing across the long mahogany table, the true depth of my father's vengeance became horrifyingly clear. Richard and Declan Sapphire had not merely embezzled $12 million. They had spent the past 2 years meticulously crafting an intricate digital scapegoat protocol. They knew their logistics scam would eventually face corporate scrutiny. They needed a fall guy, and they selected the one person whose professional expertise would make the framing look undeniably authentic. They decided to build a cage for the daughter who walked away. I read through the federal summary and felt a sickening wave of revulsion. My parents had weaponized my own history against me. They possessed my social security number, my birth certificate, and my foundational identity documents from childhood. They knew the answers to every standard security question a bank could ever ask. They knew the name of my first pet, the street where I grew up, and my mother's maiden name. Familial identity theft is a unique breed of poison because the perpetrators hold the master keys to your digital existence. They resurrected an old personal email address I had abandoned shortly after graduating from Yale. They used that dormant account to correspond with registered agents and offshore financial institutions, linking my digital ghost to the creation of the 3 shell companies. They utilized my certified public accountant license number on preliminary incorporation drafts, giving the ghost entities a veneer of legitimate financial structuring. When the federal investigators knocked on their suburban door, my parents executed a flawless collaborative performance. They sat at their kitchen table, the same table where my mother once lied to the university admissions dean and told the agents a tragic story. They claimed I was a brilliant but deeply bitter woman who harbored a terrifying obsession with wealth. They spun a narrative painting me as the sophisticated mastermind behind the entire shadow network. They told the authorities that I had engineered the embezzlement ring using my forensic accounting knowledge and that I had coerced my simple-minded brother into facilitating the wire transfers under the threat of exposing his past academic failures. They framed my expertise as the ultimate weapon. They pointed to my luxury lifestyle, my lakefront penthouse, and my rapid corporate ascent as circumstantial evidence of my hidden illicit income. They orchestrated a scenario where my success looked like the spoils of a criminal syndicate. I left the law office and returned to my condominium. I unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped into the quiet expanse of my living room. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the gray, churning waters of Lake Michigan. I did not turn on the lights. I dropped my coat onto the sofa and sank down onto the cold hardwood floor. I spread the legal documents, the federal summaries, and the printed email transcripts in a wide circle around me. I sat in the center of the paper ring, feeling a terrifying, suffocating weight crash down upon my chest. It was the exact same physical sensation I experienced at 18 years old. The tight constriction in my throat, the racing pulse, the profound, dizzying realization that the people tasked with protecting me were actively trying to bury me alive. When I stood in my childhood bedroom, clutching my duffel bags, I thought escaping their physical proximity was enough. I believed geographical distance and a new tax bracket would shield me from their venom. I was wrong. Escaping their house did not sever the invisible strings they attached to my identity. They had bided their time, waiting in the suburban shadows, plotting a betrayal so monumental it eclipsed every prior cruelty. At 18, the stakes were losing a college scholarship and sleeping on a borrowed sofa. Now the stakes were catastrophic. Federal fraud and money laundering convictions carried sentences of up to 20 years in a maximum security penitentiary. I was facing the permanent revocation of my professional license, the seizure of my assets, and decades behind iron bars. I pulled my knees to my chest, resting my forehead against my arms. The apartment was dead silent. My parents had executed a brilliant trap. They had successfully weaponized my own boundaries, using my decade of intentional silence to paint me as an isolated, remorseless criminal. They thought I would crumble. They assumed the sheer terror of a federal indictment would force me to negotiate a plea deal and take the fall to save my own brother. They believed I was still the powerless teenager standing in the freezing rain, begging for a lifeline. I lifted my head and looked at the scattered documents covering the hardwood floor. The initial panic began to recede, leaving behind a cold, hardened core of pure, unadulterated resolve. My father made a critical miscalculation. He built a digital cage using email addresses and bank routing numbers, believing that a mountain of forged paperwork would overwhelm a jury. He thought he could outsmart the system by mimicking the language of high finance. But Richard Sapphire was an amateur playing a dangerous game in an arena he did not understand. He did not comprehend the microscopic anatomy of digital data. I was not an amateur. I was a predator trained to hunt anomalies in the dark. I knew how to dissect metadata. I knew how to track geolocational timestamps and uncover the hidden architecture of a routing protocol. They tried to use my expertise as the foundation of their lie. I was going to use that exact same expertise to dismantle their entire bloodline. The grief of the betrayal evaporated entirely, replaced by a singular, chilling objective. I reached for my encrypted laptop and opened the terminal. The counterstrike was going to be flawless. My family made a fatal calculation. They assumed the 18-year-old girl who walked away in the freezing rain still existed. They believed the trauma of my youth rendered me permanently vulnerable to their machinations. They thought the mere threat of federal prosecution would paralyze me into submission, forcing me to take the fall to protect my brother. They forgot who they were dealing with. They forgot I spent my entire adult life hunting predators far more sophisticated than a retired suburban patriarch and a community college dropout. I sat across from Harrison Croft in his soundproof conference room, overlooking the bustling streets of the financial district. The initial shock of the federal inquiry had burned off, leaving a reservoir of icy determination. We needed to launch a counterstrike so precise it would dismantle their fabricated narrative before a grand jury could even convene. Harrison invoked my right to a comprehensive independent forensic data review. We retained a boutique cyber intelligence firm staffed by former government hackers and digital analysts. Our objective was singular and focused. We were going to pull the digital floorboards up and expose the rotting infrastructure underneath. Financial deception is an exceedingly messy endeavor. Arrogant people leave digital fingerprints because they believe they possess superior intellect. Richard and Declan spent 2 years drafting fake emails and forging my signature on incorporation documents. They assumed a piece of paper with my name printed on it constituted bulletproof evidence. They operated under the antiquated assumption that fraud investigations still relied solely on paper trails and verbal testimonies. But modern corporate auditing rarely depends on the text of a message. We do not care what the body of an email says. We care intensely about the hidden metadata attached to the file. Metadata functions as the invisible shadow cast by every single digital interaction. It meticulously records the exact time a document was created, the specific operating system utilized to hit send, and the geographic location of the network facilitating the transfer. The federal authorities possess the fraudulent correspondence linking my dormant personal account to the ghost corporations. My cyber team requested the raw header files for those specific communications directly from the service providers. We spent 3 exhaustive days locked in a windowless suite, analyzing thousands of lines of encrypted code. We fueled ourselves on black coffee and the relentless pursuit of exoneration. The pivotal breakthrough arrived late on a Thursday evening. The lead data analyst successfully isolated the source routing information for the emails that established the shell companies and authorized the illicit wire transfers. The Internet protocol addresses did not originate from my luxury condominium in Chicago. They did not ping off any cellular towers near my corporate office or my favorite downtown coffee shop. The digital fingerprints traced a direct, undisputable path back to a specific residential router. We compelled the internet service provider to verify the account holder matching the numerical address to a physical location. The router was officially registered to Richard Sapphire. The signal pinged from the exact coordinates of their suburban living room. My father sat on his own floral-patterned sofa, sipping his morning coffee and executing federal crimes under my name, believing a dormant email address provided an impenetrable disguise. We requested an urgent meeting with the federal agents assigned to the Apex Solutions probe. We convened in a sterile, windowless briefing room inside the regional field office. The air smelled of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. Harrison handed the lead investigator our independent cyber intelligence report. I sat in silence, resting my hands on the cool steel table, and watched the seasoned agent flip through the bound pages. The room grew exceedingly quiet. The investigator reached the section detailing the Internet Protocol trace. He pulled a red Sharpie from his breast pocket. He uncapped the marker and drew a slow, deliberate circle around the suburban residential address. The grim satisfaction of watching that red ink bleed into the paper was an indescribable triumph. The federal narrative began to pivot right there in that chilly room. The agents realized they were not interrogating the mastermind of a criminal syndicate. They were speaking to the primary victim of a highly organized familial identity theft ring. Placing the digital origin inside my parents' house was only the first phase of our aggressive counterstrike. I needed to shatter the illusion that Declan was an innocent pawn coerced into facilitating the logistics scam. Diane told the authorities her son was manipulated by his wealthy, intimidating sister. We needed to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was a willing, active participant reaping the spoils of the corporate theft. Declan operated with the unearned confidence of a golden child who never faced genuine consequences for his actions. When Apex Solutions elevated him to a vice presidency, they issued him a corporate smartphone equipped with advanced tracking software. He used that specific device to manage his daily schedule, coordinate his luxury car deliveries, and text his sycophantic friends. Our legal team filed an emergency subpoena to secure the geolocational tracking data stored on the corporate cloud servers. We cross-referenced his movement coordinates with the precise timestamps of the fraudulent cash withdrawals. The resulting map painted a damning, irrefutable picture of his daily routine. The satellite data placed Declan standing inside specific local bank branches at the exact moments the stolen capital was moved from the ghost corporations into offshore holding accounts. He was not an intimidated subordinate acting under duress. He was the primary courier physically executing the transactions during his extended lunch breaks. The federal agents studied the geolocational overlays projecting the maps onto a screen in the briefing room. The digital evidence alone was enough to exonerate me, clear my professional license, and secure their federal indictments. However, securing my personal freedom was not my final objective. I needed to ensure my family could never orchestrate another deception. I needed to dismantle the core of their defense strategy. Diane portrayed herself to the investigators as a naive, devastated housewife who knew nothing about the illicit millions flowing through her household. She claimed Richard and I kept her entirely in the dark regarding the family finances. I knew Diane Sapphire far better than the federal government ever could. She was a woman who demanded total, uncompromising control over her environment. She never permitted a single dollar to enter or exit her bank accounts without her explicit knowledge and strict approval. During my youth, she audited my meager diner paychecks, scrutinizing every cent I earned before demanding a portion for household expenses. She did not transform into a passive bystander simply because the sums grew exponentially larger. She was the treasurer of their criminal enterprise. I just needed to hand the authorities the key to her hidden vault. I looked across the steel table at the lead investigator. The agent was gathering the printed reports, preparing to request immediate arrest warrants for my father and my brother based on the newly verified metadata. I placed my hand flat against the cool metal surface, stopping his forward momentum. "You have the architect and you have the courier," I said. my voice steady and unyielding. "But you are missing the financial controller." The agent paused, raising a curious eyebrow. "Your mother claims she was oblivious to the shell companies. We have no paper trail linking her directly to the bank accounts." "That is because you are looking at the bank accounts," I replied. "You need to look at the annual tax filings." I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a secondary file folder. I had spent the weekend digging through the public revenue archives, exploiting a minor careless oversight in their laundering strategy. Fraudsters often focus so heavily on hiding the stolen money, they forget how to properly report the clean money. I handed the investigators the final nail in the coffin. It was a single piece of paper, born entirely of my parents' own breathtaking arrogance, ready to bring the matriarch down. The wheels of justice grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. The formal federal indictments were unsealed on a crisp Tuesday morning in November. By a staggering twist of cosmic irony, this occurred exactly 14 years to the day after that fateful telephone call from the Yale admissions office. There was no cinematic confrontation in a rain-swept parking lot. I did not stand on a balcony watching them fall. Systemic retribution is remarkably quiet, bureaucratic, and absolute. It arrives in the form of stamped manila folders and stern men wearing windbreakers. Federal marshals executed the apprehension warrants simultaneously across 2 different states. Declan was detained on the manicured green of an exclusive Denver country club. According to the internal incident report, my brother attempted to leverage his vice presidential title to intimidate the arresting officers. He demanded they contact his corporate legal team while wearing spiked golf shoes and holding a titanium driver. The agents simply secured his wrists behind his back, placed him in the rear of a dark, unmarked sport utility vehicle, and drove him away from his stolen kingdom. Richard was taken into custody while standing in his paved driveway, holding a ceramic coffee mug and his morning newspaper. The neighborhood watched from behind their drawn living room curtains as the proud, authoritarian patriarch was marched toward a government transport van. The man who obsessed over maintaining a flawless public image was publicly paraded in handcuffs across his own pristine lawn. With her husband and son confined to holding cells, the matriarch immediately initiated her final survival protocol. Diane. When the federal prosecutors brought her in for questioning, she deployed her most practiced routine. She transformed into a weeping, bewildered homemaker. She sat in the sterile interrogation room, clutching a tissue to her chest, sobbing about her profound ignorance. She claimed Richard ruled the household finances with an iron fist, keeping her entirely marginalized. She painted Declan as a misguided youth corrupted by corporate greed. She was entirely willing to sacrifice her own flesh and blood to avoid a prison sentence. During the extensive discovery phase, the prosecution team sifted through the mountain of evidence I provided. They did not need to break her carefully constructed facade with harsh interrogation techniques. They simply let the physical documentation dismantle her lies. The lead prosecutor placed a thick stack of certified tax returns on the metal table. These were the annual filings for the 3 ghost corporations that received the embezzled millions. Fraud requires a meticulous accounting of illicit gains to avoid immediate internal revenue audits. At the bottom of every single page verifying the fabricated income and authorizing the fraudulent deductions was a signature. It was not a forged digital proxy. It was Diane's authentic, looping, cursive handwriting, traced and verified by a forensic penmanship expert. She stared at the ink, her tears halting instantly. But the prosecution was not finished. The true, devastating blow arrived in an audio format. When moving multi-million-dollar sums across international borders, high-tier financial institutions require verbal authorization to prevent standard wire fraud. The agents pressed a small black button on a digital playback device resting near her hands. The quiet interrogation room filled with a crisp, recorded telephone conversation. It was Diane speaking to an offshore banking representative. Her voice lacked any trace of the helpless victim she was currently playing. On the tape, she sounded brisk, authoritative, and deeply knowledgeable about international routing protocols. She explicitly authorized the transfer of $2.5 million stolen dollars into a shielded holding account, correcting the bank employee on a specific SWIFT code numeral. The recording captured the treasurer of the syndicate functioning at the height of her operational capacity. The audio tape was the fatal strike. The illusion of the innocent housewife shattered into a million irrecoverable pieces. Faced with insurmountable locational, metadata-verified signatures and undeniable voice recordings, the Sapphire family defense attorneys advised an immediate surrender. Taking this staggering mountain of proof to a jury trial would have resulted in maximum statutory penalties. They possessed no leverage to negotiate and no alternate narrative to spin. The rigged scoreboard had finally caught fire and burned to the ground. The legal resolution was remarkably swift. They accepted comprehensive plea deals, admitting profound guilt to multiple counts of identity theft, wire fraud, and money laundering. We did not go to trial. I never had to take the witness stand and look at their faces. The sentencing hearing took place in a somber federal courtroom. Declan, the golden child who traded academic integrity for a stolen vice presidency, received a sentence of 6 years in a minimum security federal penitentiary. He would spend the remainder of his 30s wearing a canvas uniform, stripped of his luxury vehicles and his arrogant smirk. Richard, the patriarch, who viewed his children as financial property, received 8 years. Given his advancing age, the sentence practically guaranteed he would spend his twilight years locked inside a concrete cell, far away from the suburban respectability he craved. Because she lacked a prior criminal record and cooperated during the final asset forfeiture phase, Diane secured a slightly different fate. The judge sentenced her to 3 years of highly supervised, strict federal probation. However, the financial restitution mandated by the court was catastrophic. To repay the millions stolen from Apex Solutions, the government ordered the immediate liquidation of all their assets. My mother was forced to vacate and sell the sprawling multi-story house on the manicured street where I grew up. The local authorities auctioned off the antique dining table where she once sat and lied to the Yale admissions officer. They seized the luxury cars, the retirement portfolios, and the expensive patio furniture she prioritized over my college education. Diane was reduced to renting a tiny, cramped apartment in a lower-income district, surviving solely on a meager government stipend, stripped of her social standing and her wealthy facade. The federal indictments cleared my name completely. The firm managing partner issued a formal, private apology, and I was reinstated with a significant equity bonus. The corporate crisis was averted, and my pristine reputation was not only restored, but permanently elevated into legendary status within the industry. The predators were caged, and the stolen wealth was seized. I sat in my penthouse overlooking the lake, watching the gray water ripple under the moonlight. The legal war was definitively over. The federal courts had rendered their absolute judgment, severing the financial chains my parents tried to wrap around my neck. I was victorious. Yet as I stared out at the sprawling Chicago skyline, a profound, lingering silence echoed in my chest. The external threats were neutralized, but the internal damage, forged during 18 years of emotional starvation, remained. The legal severance was complete, but the emotional severance was still waiting. The glass turnstiles guarding the corporate lobby glowed a vibrant, welcoming green. 72 hours prior, those exact same barriers flashed a harsh, rejecting red, signaling my professional exile. Now the thick, translucent panels parted seamlessly. I stepped onto the polished marble floor, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, carrying my sleek leather briefcase. The ambient noise of the morning rush softened into a noticeable hush. Junior analysts and senior associates paused near the elevator banks. They did not stare with pity or lingering suspicion. They observed me with a quiet, reverent awe. I had not merely survived a coordinated federal framing attempt. I had dismantled a $12 million embezzlement syndicate and handed the government the architects on a silver platter using flawless forensic methodology. I returned to the towering skyscraper not as a lingering liability, but as an undisputed industry legend. I bypassed my former cubicle row and strode directly toward my corner office. Before my hand could grasp the brass door handle, Marcus Thorne emerged from the adjacent corridor. The senior managing partner who once interrogated me regarding petty childhood grudges now carried a sealed linen envelope. He did not summon me to his intimidating suite. He traveled to my territory. We stood in the hallway, illuminated by the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus extended his arm, offering the thick envelope. He possessed the rigid grace of a seasoned executive, acknowledging a grave logistical miscalculation. He looked me in the eyes and offered a sincere verbal apology. Inside that high-quality paper rested my formal reinstatement, alongside a staggering compensation package. But the true prize lay printed on the second page. It was an official offer for a junior partnership. A partnership within a premier Chicago accounting agency grants a level of systemic power few individuals ever attain. It denotes equity. It translates to untouchable leverage. I looked at the man who prioritized corporate risk over employee loyalty. I accepted his lucrative offer without a trace of a grateful smile. I took the promotion not to feed a fragile ego or to impress the wealthy elite hovering in our social circles. I secured the equity because it provided the ultimate shield. It constructed an invisible moat around my livelihood. No disgruntled relative or desperate grifter could ever threaten my career trajectory again. I was no longer a disposable employee subject to the whims of an anxious board of directors. I became the firm. With the partnership finalized, my financial standing transformed from comfortable to ironclad. My credit score remained pristine, reflecting my rigorous fiscal independence. I decided the luxury condominium felt too confining. It reminded me of the defensive crouch I assumed during my turbulent 20s. I desired a permanent sanctuary. I purchased a mid-century modern house situated directly on the rocky shores of Lake Michigan. The sprawling property featured soaring ceilings, exposed wooden beams, and expansive panoramic windows overlooking the vast, restless gray water. I furnished the spacious rooms with deliberate intent. I hung vibrant abstract paintings on the pristine white walls, replacing the sterile perfection of my previous apartment with genuine creative warmth. The house possessed no locked interior doors or hidden emotional agendas. It was a space designed for transparency and abiding peace. During my youth, the residence on Maple Ridge served as a theater for psychological warfare. Diane treated the formal dining table as a stage for her daily manipulations, while Richard used the narrow hallways to enforce his petty tyrannies. Every holiday felt like navigating a dense minefield of unspoken resentments and performative affection. The air always hung thick with unearned guilt. I promised myself my new home would never harbor that specific brand of poison. I intended to fill the sprawling kitchen and wide living spaces solely with people who earned their place in my orbit through mutual respect and unwavering honesty. Autumn painted the mature trees surrounding my property in rich shades of copper and gold. I decided to host Thanksgiving dinner. I did not invite blood relatives. I invited my chosen family. 6 trusted colleagues, 2 former college roommates who understood my nocturnal library shifts, and Harrison Croft, the defense attorney who helped secure my exoneration, arrived at dusk. We gathered around a long, custom oak table stretching across the dining room. The air smelled of roasted sage brown butter and expensive red wine. The fire crackled in the tall stone hearth, casting a warm orange glow over the faces of the people I truly valued. I sat at the head of the heavy wooden table, holding a crystal wine glass. I listened to the bright, easy laughter echoing off the timber beams. Nobody was keeping score. Nobody was auditing the affection or demanding profound gratitude for a home-cooked meal. Harrison debated a trivial sports statistic with my old roommate, while another friend poured generous servings of Pinot Noir. I looked at the feast spread before us. I looked at the genuine, unguarded smiles. The trauma of my past no longer dictated the architecture of my present reality. The suburban prison my parents constructed faded into an irrelevant memory, overshadowed by the vibrant, flourishing life I cultivated from the dirt. For years, I believed resilience simply meant enduring the storm. I thought strength equaled walking through the freezing rain without shivering or complaining. Sitting in my beautiful home, surrounded by brilliant, loyal companions, I realized I was wrong. True resilience is not merely surviving the cold downpour. It is taking the wet stones thrown at you and utilizing them to lay a foundation. It is building a fortress so impenetrable and warm that the freezing rain can never touch your skin again. I had built my fortress. The drawbridge was raised, the perimeter was secure. The festive evening concluded with warm embraces and promises to gather again for the upcoming winter holidays. I stood on my front porch, watching the taillights of their vehicles disappear down the winding gravel driveway. The crisp night air settled over the lake, bringing a profound, comforting silence to the shoreline. I walked back inside, locking the heavy wooden door behind me. I began clearing the empty wine glasses and leftover porcelain plates, feeling a deep, abiding contentment. The house felt alive, humming with positive residual energy. I finished loading the stainless steel dishwasher and wiped down the granite counters. I walked toward my home office to review a mundane client file before going to sleep. A stack of sorted mail rested on the edge of my mahogany desk brought in earlier that afternoon and promptly ignored during the dinner preparations. I thumbed through the glossy catalogs and standard utility statements. My fingers stopped on a plain white envelope. Systemic poison rarely evaporates without a trace. Toxic families do not simply disappear into the ether when a federal judge strikes the final gavel. They fester in the dark. They adapt to their new confined environments and look for microscopic cracks in the armor of the people who escaped their grasp. They reach from the rubble. The return address printed in the upper left corner of the envelope did not belong to a corporate entity or a local business. It bore the unmistakable, rigid, jagged handwriting of a man currently sitting inside a federal correctional facility. Richard Sapphire had found my unlisted address. The plain white envelope rested on the smooth granite surface of my kitchen island. It looked entirely unremarkable at first glance. It lacked the glossy finish of a corporate invitation or the thick premium stock of a legal document. It was cheap, institutional paper. Yet it carried a weight that threatened to disrupt the profound peace I had spent months cultivating within my new home. I stood motionless, staring down at the stark black ink marring the pristine white rectangle. The return address, printed neatly in the top left corner, bore the official alphanumeric designation of a federal correctional facility located in a neighboring state. Beneath the sterile government stamp, the handwriting spelled out my full legal name and my unlisted residential address. The script was unmistakable. It was rigid, jagged, and pressed so deeply into the paper that it left faint indentations on the reverse side. It was the exact same penmanship that once endorsed fraudulent checks, generated fake logistical invoices, and signed my stolen identity onto a mountain of corporate shell company formations. Richard Sapphire had spent a full calendar year sitting inside a concrete cell, plotting his next maneuver. He must have spent weeks bartering his meager prison resources, hiring outside private investigators, or exploiting obscure public record loopholes to track my geographical footprint. He hunted my sanctuary with the singular focused determination of a patriarch refusing to relinquish his favorite target. 10 years ago, the arrival of this envelope would have triggered a catastrophic emotional response. If that sealed letter had arrived when I was an exhausted college student pushing a yellow mop bucket through a university library, I would have torn the paper open with trembling fingers. The 18-year-old version of Iris Sapphire lived in a perpetual state of emotional starvation. She craved validation. She desperately sought a sliver of the paternal affection freely bestowed upon her older brother. The younger iteration of myself would have scrutinized every single sentence, searching for a genuine apology. She would have analyzed the ink for teardrops, hoping that the harsh reality of a criminal conviction had finally shattered his narcissistic delusions. She would have prayed that hitting rock bottom caused the scales to fall from his eyes, allowing him to recognize the brilliant, capable daughter he callously discarded in the freezing rain. Society conditions us to anticipate the miraculous redemption of our parents. We are taught that family bonds eventually triumph over severe dysfunction. But I was no longer a vulnerable teenager seeking permission to exist. I was a 33-year-old junior partner at a premier forensic accounting agency. I did not view the world through the soft lens of familial hope. I analyzed human behavior through the unforgiving metrics of historical data and behavioral patterns. Fraudsters do not undergo miraculous moral transformations simply because a judge hands them a prison uniform. Confinement breeds resentment, not accountability. I pulled out a tall wooden stool and sat down at the kitchen island. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool stone, keeping my hand several inches away from the toxic artifact. I did not need to break the seal to comprehend the contents. My mind functioned as an intricate decrypting machine, translating his hidden motives without reading a single written word. The letter would begin with a calculated attempt at emotional manipulation. Richard would weaponize his advancing age and his declining health. He would describe the harsh, unforgiving conditions of the penitentiary, painting himself as a fragile elder statesman, unjustly persecuted by an overzealous federal government. He would carefully omit the $12 million he laundered. He would rewrite the historical narrative, claiming his financial crimes were merely desperate, misguided attempts to provide a prosperous life for our family. Once the foundation of guilt was laid, he would pivot to the transaction. An abuser never reaches out unless they require a resource. Federal prison operates on a brutal internal economy. He needed commissary funds to purchase basic comforts. He needed expensive telecommunication credits to maintain his influence over the outside world. Most importantly, he needed a pristine, successful daughter to draft glowing character reference letters for future parole board hearings. He wanted to parade my corporate title and my unblemished reputation before a panel of judges, utilizing my hard-earned credibility to shorten his own sentence. It was the identical toxic cycle wrapped in cheap government stationery. He intended to drain my resources to fund his survival, exactly as he planned to steal my diner paychecks 14 years prior. I reached out and placed my index finger on the top right corner of the envelope. I ran my thumb slowly over the postmark, feeling the raised ridges of the cancellation stamp. The tactile sensation grounded me in the present reality. The ink felt dry and lifeless. The paper felt thin and fragile. The man who cast a terrifying shadow over my entire childhood was reduced to a singular piece of mail, requiring my explicit consent to cause harm. He relied on a fundamental human vulnerability. He gambled on my innate curiosity. He knew that the desire for closure is a powerful, compelling force. He assumed I would open the letter just to see the words, expecting the psychological poison to seep into my brain the moment my eyes scanned his handwriting. Reading his justifications would force me to engage in a silent mental debate. It would grant him free rent inside my head, reviving the ghosts I worked so diligently to banish. I pulled my hand away from the envelope. I realized that true closure does not arrive in a sealed apology. True closure is an internal, executive decision. It is the profound recognition that an empty well will never yield fresh water, regardless of how many times you lower the bucket. I stood up from the wooden stool. The afternoon sun filtered through the expansive windows, casting long golden beams across the hardwood floor. I picked up the letter, holding it by the very edge. I turned my back on the kitchen and walked down the quiet hallway toward my home office. My office served as the nerve center of my professional empire. It housed my encrypted servers, my dual monitors, and a heavy-duty commercial paper shredder tucked discreetly beneath the windowsill. The machine possessed a high-torque motor and interlocking steel blades designed to obliterate highly sensitive financial dossiers into microscopic, unreadable confetti. I stepped into the room and pressed the power button on the top of the sleek black machine. The motor hummed to life, emitting a low, eager vibration that resonated through the floorboards. I held the sealed envelope directly above the narrow feeding slot. I did not experience a dramatic flash of regret. I did not feel the crushing weight of daughterly obligation. Instead, a wave of immense, astonishing liberation washed over my entire body. Society dictates that we owe our parents a final audience. We are expected to harbor a lingering sense of duty, even toward the architects of our own destruction. Rejecting that societal expectation required a fierce, uncompromising courage. I loosened my grip. The heavy-duty sensors detected the paper. The steel blades caught the bottom edge of the envelope, pulling it downward with swift, mechanical efficiency. The grinding, chewing noise filled the quiet office. I watched his rigid, jagged handwriting disappear into the dark slot. The machine severed the postage stamp, the return address, and the unseen, manipulative pleas. Within 3 seconds, the entire artifact was reduced to a tangled mound of shredded white ribbons falling harmlessly into the plastic collection bin below. The motor idled, returning to a soft, ambient hum. I reached down and powered the machine off. The silence that followed was distinct. It was not the tense, anxious quiet of a suburban house waiting for the next explosive argument. It was the vast, unyielding silence of a fortified castle. Richard Sapphire attempted to reach from the rubble of his ruined empire, extending one final desperate claw toward my sanctuary. I did not engage in a tug of war. I simply cut the rope. I walked over to the window and looked out at the churning gray waters of the lake. The emotional severance was finally complete. I felt a sudden, staggering absence of guilt. For the first time in my entire existence, the psychological chains binding me to the legacy of the Sapphire family shattered into dust. I stood in the center of my own domain, breathing the crisp, clean air, knowing the final test was conquered. Yet as I prepared to turn away from the glass, a profound realization settled into my mind. The victory was secured, but the blueprint of my survival held a much larger purpose waiting to be shared. I am 32 years old. I wake up before dawn, not out of lingering anxiety, but because I genuinely enjoy the quiet solitude of the early morning. I walk into my custom kitchen, pour a cup of dark roast coffee, and stand by the expansive glass windows, watching the sunrise ignite the surface of Lake Michigan. The water reflects shades of crushed amber and deep indigo. The house remains perfectly still. I sleep peacefully every single night. The chronic hypervigilance that defined my adolescence has vanished. My nervous system no longer operates on a relentless high alert setting. When my cell phone rings, I do not flinch, anticipating a manufactured crisis or a financial demand. I answer it knowing the caller is either a trusted colleague, a valued client, or a cherished friend. The contrast between my current reality and my former existence is staggering. I used to navigate a suburban household that functioned like a covert battlefield. I learned to read the microscopic shifts in my parents' facial expressions, decoding their unspoken resentments before they could detonate. I spent 18 years functioning as a human shock absorber, internalizing their failures and mitigating their volatile moods. Now the only anomalies I hunt are hidden within corporate spreadsheets. The energy I once wasted trying to earn the affection of two deeply flawed individuals is now channeled into protecting my wealth, securing my future, and nurturing the authentic relationships I chose to cultivate. If you are listening to this audio and you recognize the chilling contours of my upbringing, I need you to absorb the next few sentences carefully. If you are the designated scapegoat of your household, the child tasked with absorbing the toxic runoff of your parents' unfulfilled ambitions, hear my voice. You know the exact dynamic I am describing. You are the individual who works twice as hard to secure a fraction of the recognition freely handed to the favored sibling. You are the one who routinely sacrifices your own comfort to maintain the fragile ecosystem of a dysfunctional home, only to be labeled too much or too dramatic the moment you request a baseline level of human respect. You carry the invisible burden of holding a fractured unit together while being blamed for every crack in the foundation. The golden child receives the accolades, the financial subsidies, and the unearned praise. Meanwhile, you receive the heavy expectations, the harsh criticisms, and the distinct, chilling message that your primary purpose is to serve the collective image of the family. They condition you to believe that your exceptional achievements are merely baseline requirements, while any minor infraction is a catastrophic moral failure. They weaponize your competence, turning your ability to survive into an excuse to neglect you. Society heavily conditions us to revere the institution of family above all other social contracts. The prevailing cultural narrative insists that blood ties require endless forgiveness. We are routinely told to turn the other cheek, to honor our mothers and fathers, and to protect the domestic image, regardless of the internal cost. Television shows and mainstream movies peddle the myth of the miraculous holiday reconciliation, where decades of severe psychological abuse are magically erased by a single tearful apology over a roasted turkey. That is a dangerous, destructive fallacy. You do not owe your loyalty to a system engineered to dismantle your spirit. You do not owe your financial future to a patriarch who views you as a localized tax bracket, or a matriarch who treats your intellect as an active threat to her authority. Setting a rigid boundary is not an act of betrayal. It is a necessary display of profound self-preservation. When you construct a wall between yourself and your abusers, you are not declaring war. You are simply establishing a sovereign territory where their manipulation holds zero currency. You are revoking their access to your emotional vault. Look back at the defining moments of your own survival. 14 years ago, my mother stood in a suburban kitchen and told the dean of Yale University a calculated lie. She withdrew my academic application, believing she held the master key to my destiny. She assumed locking that specific door would force me to remain trapped inside her stifling narrative, serving as a permanent financial battery for my older brother. She failed to comprehend the fundamental nature of resilience. By attempting to confine me, she inadvertently handed me the exact tools required to forge my own unparalleled path. They thought they were burying me under a pile of rejected paperwork. They did not realize they were burying a seed. You do not require permission from your abusers to achieve greatness. You do not need their validation to pursue a demanding career, build a lucrative enterprise, or cultivate a beautiful existence. Furthermore, you certainly do not need their hollow applause when you finally reach the summit. Their approval is a counterfeit currency. It holds no purchasing power in the real economy of a fulfilling life. If you wait for the people who hurt you to suddenly recognize your worth, you will spend your entire existence paralyzed in a waiting room that has no exit doors. The most profound realization I gained during my ascent through the corporate financial sector is that success earned in the dark shines the brightest. Every late-night study session, every brutal janitorial shift, every forensic audit I conducted added another layer of impenetrable granite to my defenses. Build your fortress. Lay the bricks with your own hands using the cold, hard mortar of undeniable truth. Do not apologize for the height of your walls or the strength of your gates. The people who genuinely belong in your life will never ask you to lower your drawbridge just so they can comfortably invade your space. Colleagues and acquaintances often ask me if watching my father and brother receive federal prison sentences provided a deep sense of triumphant revenge. They expect me to revel in the spectacular collapse of the Sapphire family syndicate. The honest answer is no. Watching them face justice was merely a bureaucratic correction of a mathematical error. The judicial system balanced an illicit ledger. It removed a structural liability from the societal equation. True revenge does not reside in witnessing the downfall of the people who harmed you. Taking pleasure in their misery is a fleeting, temporary satisfaction that keeps you anchored to their timeline. The ultimate, enduring revenge is a life lived beautifully, entirely out of their reach. It is the ability to sit at a custom oak table surrounded by a chosen family, drinking expensive wine and realizing the toxic ghosts of your past are no longer invited to the dinner party. It is the quiet, profound victory of reclaiming your own name and rewriting your own legacy. My name is Iris Sapphire. I am a junior partner at a premier forensic accounting agency. I own a sprawling home on the water. I built an empire from the remnants of a shattered teenage dream, and I did it without sacrificing my integrity. The rigged scoreboard collapsed, but my ledger remains perfectly balanced. If Iris and her journey resonated with you, drop a comment below and tell me your story. What was the hardest boundary you ever had to set with your family? I read every single one. Do not forget to like and subscribe to Sophia Told Stories for more incredible tales of survival and success. See you in the next one. The most profound revelation hidden within the wreckage of a toxic upbringing is that your endurance was never meant to be a permanent destination. Society conditions us to view familial loyalty as an unbreakable contract, demanding we set ourselves on fire to keep our bloodline warm. But survival requires a different mathematics. When you are cast as the scapegoat, the child whose brilliance is treated as a threat and whose independence is viewed as a rebellion, you learn to decode the world through a lens of defensive hypervigilance. You spend your youth internalizing their failures, believing that if you just work harder or shrink smaller, the rigged scoreboard will finally balance. It never does. The true lesson is recognizing that their rejection is not your reflection. Setting a concrete boundary is not a betrayal. It is the most basic act of self-respect a person can perform. You do not need their permission to protect yourself, and you certainly do not need their applause when you build an empire from the dirt they left you in. If navigating this dark, familiar terrain resonates with the silent battles you fight behind closed doors, drop a comment below and share the hardest boundary you ever had to draw. Subscribe to Sophia Told Stories for more narratives about reclaiming your stolen power. Healing is rarely a cinematic finish line crossed in a single triumphant stride. It is a quiet, ongoing negotiation with the ghosts of your past. You build your fortress, you secure the perimeter, and you lock the heavy doors against the cold. But some nights, you will stand in a beautiful, secure home you bought with your own scarred hands, staring out at the darkening horizon, and a faint, familiar echo will whisper from the shadows. You will realize the empty chairs at your table were never a tragedy, but a hard-won victory. Yet as the silence settles around you, you might still catch yourself looking into the dark, wondering why you had to fight a war just to earn the right to exist.